Greetings, everyone. I am Derek Bauman, and I am pleased to join you in your virtual classroom tonight. Professor Grundy had me scheduled for Tuesday to come in and speak with you all about the social justice aspects of public transportation and how that all relates. And first of all, I'd like to thank Professor Grundy for inviting me. I've spoken to a number of his classes over the years and done a number of presentations and lectures and classes and trainings on topics like this, similar topics around public transportation. This is the first time I've ever done this remotely in a virtual classroom, recording a video like this, and we are certainly in very unique and challenging times. I know this is impacting all of you, but I hope you're able to get as much out of this as you can, and I'll try to share some information on some points that Professor Grundy has raised and asked me to touch on. As I record this, it's about 5 p.m. on Sunday night. We've just experienced the lockdown order, shelter in place, stay at home from the governor, and so that actually ties into what we're talking about and public transportation and how does that relate? How does a scenario like we have now with coronavirus, how does that impact our public transportation systems? And this is very unique and challenging times, and a lot of these questions remain to be asked, but they're important ones, and we may face a situation again like this one day after this eventually passes. In the meantime, please, everyone, be well. Stay at home, pay attention to these orders. It's very important. But with that being said, we only have a short amount of time. I could teach a semester on this topic probably, and even a class of doing this in 15 or 20 minutes doesn't really do it justice, but we'll do our best to share some information. And if any of you would like to reach out to me, I'm happy to do that. Again, my name is Derek Bauman. I'm a resident over the Rhine. A public transportation advocate, have for many years, ever since I was a kid growing up in Cleveland, and my family relied on public transportation. We did not have a lot of means. We only had one car. In my earliest memories were riding they call it the Rapid, in Cleveland into downtown with my dad. And so I know I have experienced in my life the importance of this. I'm currently car free, living downtown Cincinnati. It's not easy in Cincinnati, but it's doable. But I face these challenges. I ride the bus, I ride the streetcar, I use public transit, have studied and experienced these systems across the world. And it's very interesting in terms of the social justice aspect. What exactly does that mean? What does it entail? And how can we improve, I think, is the most important part. So let me just start off by reviewing a couple of things that Professor Grundy has asked me to touch on. First of all, well, let me back up for just a moment. Y'all might see over my shoulder here this photo. That's actually me when I was getting sworn in when I started at the Mason Police Department. My career was really not in public policy or transit advocacy, those types of things. My career was as a police officer for 26 years. And even though that seems really different from being a public transit advocate, I've sat on the board of All Aboard Ohio, a nonprofit public transit advocacy organization in this state. I chair the not criminal justice, but public transit subcommittee for the Cincinnati branch of the NAACP, where I'm on the executive board, and I'll touch more on that here in a moment. But people ask, Derek, you were a cop for 26 years. You've now retired, focusing a lot of your time and energy on this advocacy work. How did all that relate? But that's how I got started. I grew up with it, rely on it today, and so I know the importance of strong public transportation for many people in our society. So that's who that guy is right over there. And that even kind of ties into it a little bit, because we've got folks that were driving that I ran into in my career trying to get to work, because there is no public transit out in Mason to speak of. We have the 71X that runs up 71 up to Kings Island, but it's minimal. And so, we'd have folks from Cincinnati, low income, working a 12, 15 hour an hour job at Cintas, driving an old beater car, it's breaking down, or they're getting pulled over for violations or this or that. They're already poor, can barely afford the car. Now they're getting tickets, can't pay the ticket, lose their license, don't have insurance, lose their license, can't afford to pay the ticket, get a warrant out for their arrest. And now it becomes a criminal justice issue for somebody that's just trying to get to work because we don't have strong public transit in this country as a whole, and specifically in our area here in Cincinnati. And again, we'll touch on what we can do to solve that problem a little bit. But that's how that all kind of ties in even seemingly unrelated ways. Many, many social impacts from our lack of public transportation funding here in Cincinnati, in this region, in this country, in the state of Ohio as well. The first question Professor Grundy poses to me, clearly we know that there are economic, environmental impacts of the automobile. If we can transition more folks into public transit, a much more efficient, a much cleaner way of travel. But the social justice dimension, why is that consistently brought up? And what are some of these angles? And what are the data around that? Well, I'm going to try to keep this as local as possible because we are actually a great case study here in Cincinnati with Cincinnati Metro and in this region. There is currently, we were supposed to vote last Tuesday, got postponed because of Corona. We'll see what happens. But issue 7 is on the ballot. This is not an earnings tax. We'll replace the current system of an earnings tax in the city of Cincinnati, which funds the bulk of Metro's operations, and we'll replace that with a sales tax and increase the amount that's coming in. We'll see. We don't know exactly when we're voting at this time, and so there's certainly an effort around that. It's not typically, Democrats tend to support public transportation more. This particular issue has been endorsed by, in Cincinnati, the Hamilton County Democratic Party, also the Republican Party, and we have kind of a third party here in Cincinnati. The Charter Committee has also endorsed this. The business community is behind it. It's actually the Chamber of Commerce that has been leading the campaign for it because our business leaders realize that there is such a need. Folks need to be able to mostly get to work and many other aspects of leading their lives here in Cincinnati. There are in Hamilton County, about 50,000 jobs, studies show, that are not accessible by public transit. So here in the basin, in the core of Cincinnati and over the Rhine, West End, and other communities, Avondale, South Fairmount, where we have high numbers, high percentages of households in poverty, but yet we have these jobs that have also sprawled out to the suburbs, along with the suburban sprawl that has occurred over the last 40, 50, 60 years, fouling the interstate highways, fouling the cars and people's ability to move out of the city. Now we have people coming back, but we have a significant level of the population here in the city of Cincinnati. Over 20% of our households don't own cars. And so these folks rely every single day getting to the doctor, getting to the grocery store. We have food deserts, and Walnut Hills Kroger closed down. The Kroger out just outside the city border, outside of Mount Airy, recently closed down on Coleraine Avenue. How do people that don't have cars and don't have neighborhood grocery stores buy food? It's very challenging. I mean, you can pay a lot more money and have it delivered these days, extra delivery fees. Folks don't have credit cards. There are many impacts there. Healthcare, how do I get to a doctor's appointment? All of these types of things impact large segments of our population. And even if it doesn't directly impact us, even if we don't use public transportation, if these folks don't have this lifeline, what happens to them? What other government programs are necessary to support them? In my view, the outcome, not only on a human level, but even on an economic level, is much worse. And so we're faced with this, and we have people that need jobs and want to work, can't afford a car, or as we mentioned, they maybe afford buying a beater car, and it breaks down. They have to get oil changes. You got to put gas in it. Gas is coming down a little bit now. Insurance is expensive. All of these things, we don't think about it. They lose their license for some reason, and then what happens? I can't get to work, or I have to drive without a license, and then all the negative outcomes, even maybe going to jail on their warrant, are outcomes of this because we don't have public transit. We don't fund it in this country in a real way. So those are just some of the, just very briefly, numbers. 50,000 jobs in Hamilton County. Over 20% of our households are car-free here. Some by choice, such as myself. I could afford a car. Don't want to pay for a car. Have better things to spend that money on, especially these days in supporting our local businesses. But there are folks that just rely on this. The elderly, people with disabilities, if we want to speak to the social justice impacts of public transportation. How do they get around? How do they manage their lives independently? And as our population gets older and older as well, how do they do that? How do they get around? It's a rhetorical question. Without the transit, they don't. It's as simple as that. And now it's very challenging and difficult. It can take, because the way our system is set up, you have to come into downtown on a bus, transfer, and go out the other side, out the other direction. If you live on the west side trying to get to the east side, it can be 2 hours. If you miss your connection, you're waiting because we don't sufficiently fund transit in a substantive way to make it really convenient for people. If you have childcare, I'm trying to get to work, but I have to take my kid to the daycare first. It could be hours. If they miss their bus or the bus is running late, they're getting written up at work. They do that 2 or 3 times, and you're fired. And now what? So many outcomes from this that are negative that a lot of us don't really think about. So those are some. And again, this is just really touching the surface on this, but hopefully fuels some thought. What are some of the public policy changes that could result in public transportation systems that are more equitable and more productive from a social justice perspective? What would a just transportation system look like? Well, for me, that system would be extensive. I mean, it would be something like what we have in Europe or Asia. I've recently spent a fair amount of time in Medellin, Colombia. We think of Colombia and Pablo Escobar and how things were 25 years ago. Much different today. They have an extensive heavy rail network, over 20 miles, I believe it is, with connecting bus routes, a streetcar that comes off of that where it doesn't have to navigate the cars because they close the street down to vehicular traffic, and aerial trams. Medellin's in a valley, and so how do we connect the folks that live up in the barrios? A lot of times the lower income folks are up here. How do we connect them down to where the commerce is in the city center? They've created these aerial tram lines. Simply put, it needs to be much more robust. We're not getting the support from the federal government. It's never really, because of our car culture here in the U.S., it's just never been emphasized. And we see it in some of the bigger cities. But I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to resources, right? And we've made, nobody ever questions how much another lane on I-75 costs. But heaven forbid, and we're seeing it now with some of the opponents of Issue 7 who've been really disorganized because the big organizations are supporting it. But the argument is, we can't afford this. Don't want to pay for it. It's a welfare program, all of those types of things. So it gets into that broader discussion, but I think the bottom line is nationally, in our psyche and mentality, we've just never really emphasized public transportation, and frankly, it's sad. It holds us back in many other ways, which is not the focus of this, economically and others, but so much of our money goes into our cars. And if you had that freed up, I mean, it's almost like the student loan situation where so much of people's resources are dedicated to that, and those are dollars that could be spent elsewhere. And when you're only making $9, $10, $11, $12 an hour, trying to work 2 jobs, get from one to the next, even a fare increase of 25 cents or something, it doesn't sound like a lot. But when you're living literally paycheck to paycheck on the brink, trying to make rent and everything else, it's impactful. And when I don't have access to those jobs, at what point does a person just, by human nature, throw their hands up and say, forget it? So tying back into my prior comment, about the Cincinnati NAACP. I'm very proud to have been elected to the executive committee. As far as I know, I think I'm the only white police officer ever voted in the history of the organization onto an NAACP executive committee. But in that role, I actually wrote the NAACP's national policy. I'll provide a link that you all can check that out. The organization it was kind of shocking to me, but when I did the research, I found out that they had never actually taken a real policy stance on public transportation. And so in 2016, I wrote a resolution calling public transit a civil right. And that resolution was adopted by our local branch and then by the national NAACP. And so that is now their official policy stance on public transportation. It is a civil right. As human beings, we must be able to move about, except in times of crisis, such as today. Now, when we're under a stay-at-home order, but in our lives, to be able to have commerce, to be able to do all the things that we need to do, we need to be able to move about, and we need public transit to do that and do it in an equitable way. So being able to access that fundamental civic right of being able to move about is reserved not only for the wealthy and those that can afford cars, but for everyone. And so in that human perspective, to me, at its very base level, it is important that we support this and important that we advocate for this. And hopefully over time, we are able to change this attitude, nationally and certainly here locally in the Cincinnati region. Moving on to the next question. Are there any on-the-ground movements that are working to promote social justice in public transportation? Is there such a movement locally? Short answer is yes. If so, who's involved? What are they working on? What are the chances of success? Well, I think Professor Grundy's teeing me up on issue 7 on that one, which I've already mentioned. I encourage everyone to go on to Cincinnati Metro's website, look at the Reinventing Metro Plan, which is what will be funded coming out of this. It's not just more bus service, it's that. We're also getting into bus rapid transit, and we're talking about, for example, we have very few, something super basic, bus shelters. And I've done this, I've been in this experience, and I've been standing next to people just trying to get to work, and we're standing out in the rain. Or it's January, you're freezing cold, the wind's blowing, wind chill, you're out there with your kid because you're trying to get to work, and it's rained, and now it's freezing, and the wind's blowing. We don't even have bus shelters. Metro's broke. Literally, we can't afford to supply these types of things and this type of infrastructure that if you start Googling it, you can see what it looks like when it's done properly in other cities where they have the resources. And it's sad. It is sad and really pains my heart when I'm standing out there in the pouring rain, and not for me, but for the people who are heading to work and now they're soaking wet. I mean, we don't think about these things, and it's just sad. So issue 7 is currently the local issue behind this. And really, I'll put my plug in here. I hope you all take a look. I encourage you to support this. It's very beneficial in multiple ways, but particularly in the social justice perspective and being able to do something more robust. We have not increased or changed the way we fund our system, and very few. I think we're the only major. There may be 1 or 2 others, but we're the only major city in the nation that funds our bus system, which is at least countywide, and goes outside the county. But it's funded through a 0.3% earnings tax from the city of Cincinnati. It was done that way temporarily in 1973 to save the system when it changed from a privatized system to a public system, in hopes that Hamilton County would soon pass a countywide sales tax. Here we are, half a century later, it hasn't happened. And so at this point, that temporary system no longer is functional. Metro will be broke when you look at the numbers and where their expenses are going relative to what this tax brings in under the current status. And so there have to be changes, or we're going to be facing a crisis, a critical crisis, one that's being really getting worse by the minute today under the current situation. Systems across the country are losing a lot of money, and let me touch on that for just a moment. We have a stimulus plan that I believe is either just voted on or will soon be voted on by the United States Senate. The airline industry, for example, is requesting $50 billion, probably more to come after that. Transit across the U.S., all the transit agencies requested $12.7 billion in this trillion-dollar plus stimulus package that is coming out, emergency for coronavirus. The Senate plan that they put forth has $0 for public transportation agencies. Everything from Amtrak on down to our local agencies like Metro. Now, how are, when we're giving all of this assistance to private companies, very important companies, not taking anything away from that, but $0 for public transportation. I think that speaks volumes about how transit agencies are seen in this country, and hopefully it will change, because the outcomes can be very, very bad here, and I'm not sure how, if this continues on for an indefinite period of time, how some of these agencies across the country in major cities are going to continue. And you're talking about tens of millions, hundreds of millions of rides annually. What's going to happen to these systems? It's a crisis. So that's my pitch on issue 7. Again, everybody from the business community, all our major parties are supporting this. I hope it passes. If it doesn't, we're in big trouble. It's as simple as that. I mean, I don't know how else to phrase it. And not only are we in big trouble here in Cincinnati and our region, but on a very human level, if the bus came today and tomorrow it doesn't, what are these people going to do? I don't know. But it's scary. It's scary on a human level. And so with that, I'll close. I wish we had more time. I wish I could engage and take some of your questions and go from there. Having said that, I'm happy to connect if anyone wants to. Again, my name is Derek Bauman, at Derek Bauman on Twitter. Shoot me an email, derekbauman@gmail.com. We can connect if any want to have some more background, more resources, anything I can help you with, and I will provide some links for Dr. Grundy to share. So again, Dr. Grundy, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you all for engaging and staying engaged here in your virtual classroom, and please adhere to the lockdown. I mean, this is an unprecedented situation. It's dangerous for a lot of folks, so we really do need to take it seriously. Thank you, everyone, and stay well.